both Matt, Brody, and I are going to kind of team this effort. And so we're breaking this up in a couple of pieces. We have a very select area that we'd like to talk about and focus on. And then we'll have other meetings planned to be able to literally put meat on the bone. So that will make it very helpful, okay, in terms of focusing this conversation. And if you've seen the presentation that is in the packet and read through that, then you will know that what the areas we're going to start on, how we're going to focus that. So if you would, if you go to the next chart for me, Brittany. Okay, this kind of gives you a little bit of a structure of the conversations that we'll have in the future. Currently, our focus is going to be on the first work session. You kind of have an outline of what we like to talk about. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what we plan to do at the end in terms of taking what we create today and then moving that so we can move into the second session. So with that chart, what we'd like to do in this session is basically focus on a couple of important things. First, explain and have a better understanding of the purpose of strategic plans. Define and change Royse City's mission statement. We give you an idea of one, even give you a definition of what a mission statement is. Is that the right statement? And if it is, great, we can move on. But if we need to tweak it or look at it or change it, please, let's have that conversation as we get there. We're going to basically look and outline the change of the major categories. We call them pillars that you may see. And I'll show you a chart here in a second that talks to that. And then we need to look at the vision statements as it relates to each of the pillars. It will work on the screen. Yeah, I tried that one time before with the laser.
It's a green laser too, so.
Yeah, you would think it'll work. So that's where we like to focus this session. Now, if I can, let me be pretty blunt. I've been involved in these most of my life. And if there's one thing that I've always seen, and it's unfortunate, it's where in the room, okay, there's the people who basically are leaders, and then there's people who are basically want somebody else to lead. This conversation cannot happen. It cannot be effective unless you feel absolutely comfortable that you can provide input to what we're talking about. Okay, this has to be ours. We have to have ownership to the strategic plan. And this is not a department head and a council member or mayor conversation. This is us. And to be honest with you, there probably ought to be a few more of us here so that we really capture the ideas. But please, if you feel you would like to make a comment, make the comment. If you think we can make it better, let's make it better. If you don't have ownership in this process, then I think you're going to be reluctant to want to support it. And we need your ownership. You need to own this. So that's where we want to make sure we start the conversation. Next chart. Okay. You may have read the purposeness of having a strategic plan, but let me just read it aloud if you don't mind. The central purpose of the 5-year strategic plan is to provide Royse City with the tools that can be used by elected officials and city staff to guide goal setting and focused efforts on those things that have been identified as the highest priorities. These are things that are important to us. Whether you're relying upon the public's input, which we did have a survey a couple of years ago that gave us some real insight of their thoughts, or what you believe is important, it needs to be part of this conversation. To truly be effective, this plan needs to become part of how elected officials and city staff operate and think about programs and services. That's what strategic planning is all about. It becomes part of it. We move with it. We adapt to it. We change it. But it becomes something we can use as a tool. Now, for you elected officials, let me tell you why this is important. Because whether you choose to want to be reelected or going to run the gauntlet of reelection, or you simply go up there and simply says, this is my last. Your ideas, your knowledge, your visions, your very substance of what you've been able to capture over the years needs to be available for those who are coming after us. They need to hear, they need to understand. They can certainly adapt it, they can certainly change it, but they will not know what you know unless we capture it. And for city staff, let me be honest with you. Ross, how long you been here in Roy City?
33 years.
Okay, but who's counting, right? 33 years you have lived, breathed, and donated, I'd rather say, a large significant portion of your life to the city. Would you agree with me? You kind of know Roy City?
Yeah.
Okay. And because you have that kind of the tribal knowledge about where we've been, what we've been through, your background and understanding of being so long, okay, been part of Roy City could be helpful in making sure we see the future. Particularly, Ross, I'm putting you on the spot because I know you've been here a long time. Particularly to help us who may not have been part of the city as long as you have, that we don't trip over the same mistakes that you have seen mistakes have been made. I think that would be very valuable for us. So again, I encourage you to be part of this conversation and help us to frame the intent of this meeting is to build, in my opinion, this strategic plan, this vision, this idea of where we want to be when we grow up. Next chart. Okay. Now, my comment to you would be this. Is there any concerns or questions about the purposes of a strategic plan and why we are here? And if you feel uncomfortable, if you want to say something, please put it on the table. Let's have a conversation before we move to the mission statement. Okay. Mission statement. We can debate vision statement, mission statement. My experience is that what we are as a government entity, it's a mission statement. That's the focus. That's where we start. The definition, and there's lots of different definitions of mission statement. A mission statement is a concise explanation of the organization's reason for existence. It describes the organization's purpose and the overall intent. That's what they say the mission statement definition is. The question I'm asking you is that proposed mission statement tell us what we want it to tell us in terms of why Roy City government exists?
Can I jump in and ask what your thoughts, concerns are about the current one and how you went from that to this? What was your thought process and how you worked through that?
Yeah, that's a good question. When the mission statement that I got involved in when I first was elected mayor, and I apologize, I don't have it with me, but you don't have to go too far. Go upstairs and read it on the wall.
Would you like me to read it?
Oh, please.
To provide a safe community through innovation, respect, and teamwork where people want to live, work, and play.
That's it. And Diane, it's a good statement. But the statement itself was created, okay, by a public safety department head. And if you read the statement, it really does a great job defining the safety component and the purpose. But not everything we do in Roy City is safety. And so the intent of just framing up just a draft was to not exclude safety, but look at it from a perspective that simply says there's a lot of other organization within Roy City government that comes to the table to provide what appears to be the quality of life what we think our residents expect and need. And that was the primary purpose of just shifting a little bit. Now, to this point, it may not necessarily be the right words, but the mission statements by its definition is simply this. Everything points back to the mission statement. Everything. Whether you're basically we're going to talk here a few minutes about how we can get the best employees and keep our employees. no question, if you look at it from that perspective, then if we're going to be able to provide the quality of life of what Royce City residents expect, then we better darn well have the best employees who can provide it. Agreed?
Do you think it should say like Royce City government and staff or employees or something like that instead of just government?
Can be. Yeah, we could add a little more clarity to the government. So it looks like it's a little bit more than just a government, because it is about the people.
Would the government imply that staff is government,
It
not
does.
just elected officials?
It does.
Because I was thinking what she was thinking, but then I was trying to decide, does government encompass all of us here in this room?
It does. And everybody who's works for the city, who's not here, and all the part-times.
The government.
But I think, Ann, what you're saying is an interesting point. Is it not personable enough? Is government so vague that we just simply says, well, we're just government? And it should be more than just that. Is that your point? Comments?
I don't like the negative connotation of government.
Yeah.
I don't know that I want that in a mission statement.
Yeah, I was gonna.
I get we're the government,
Right.
they know that, but I
Right.
don't think we want that in a mission statement. I don't like the negative
Yeah,
connotation.
Roy City
point.
exists rather than Roy City government, because Roy City is not necessarily the government entity of who like controls, it's the entire populace, it's the
Okay.
entire citizen.
And because government does have some connotations with some that simply
With
be
a power
part of the
structure.
problem.
Yeah, there's,
Okay, great comment. So would you feel comfortable then, Roy City employees, as I think what Ann's saying, or do you feel comfortable just taking government completely out of this sentence?
Well, I would be okay with just taking government completely
striking
out.
government.
Yeah,
We okay with that?
because I find that that's a stumbling block right off
Agreed.
the,
Yeah.
right off the,
You immediately
Right.
throw somebody into that silo.
Just by me trying to get somebody to donate stuff to our city said, I won't donate anything that's government. So right there, I want that out of there.
I had that conversation with that gentleman the other day. I should tell you about that, Ann.
Yeah.
Okay,
and I
We'll take
think
this.
that
Great comment.
safety is kind of secondarily referred to in there, but I believe that if we take a look at what bylaw Roy City is required to do, I think safety is one of the biggest components of that. So it might be nice to throw that word in there somewhere, somehow, just as a clarification, even though it talks about municipal services, but
Well, isn't the implication there with the quality of life? Roy exists to enhance the quality of
and that may
life.
be sufficient.
Yeah, because I mean, when I think of quality of life, I think of, I have a safe community with which I can go out into and I don't have to, I mean,
comments?
Do we have a mission statement from the county or state? That, because it's overarching.
Sure.
And we have to take it from them and work our way down through the city, so is there anything from the county or the state that we have that we can also include in our mission statement, because we want to follow the same?
It's an interesting point. And traditionally, I think that's a good point, that's my experience as well, is that
Rough.
in the federal world, to give you an idea, and particularly the Department of Defense, they have a mission statement.
yeah,
And there's a subset all the way down into what the Air Force's mission statement, all the way down to my old organization's mission statement as it locks step in terms of the DoD or Department of Defense's mission. Yeah, the most interesting piece, and that's certainly something we could look at as we refine this, is that I've always thought that Roy City was simply part of this statewide organization called government. And then some lawyer, Matt, advised me one day and simply says, you need to understand that Roy City is an independent incorporated entity. I have a hard time understanding what that means. Independent incorporated entity. It basically suggests is that for all practical purposes, we function independent of everybody else. We're a business, we're a corporation. So, but let me offer this thought to your question, Mike, because I think it's a good point. If you're okay with this, we'll take government out. But we can come back, just as we refine this, let's pull what the state's mission statement is, let's pull what the county's mission statement is, and see how we may or may not fit before we close this chapter on mission statement. You okay with that approach?
Yeah, I can't find a Weber County mission statement, but I can find multiple different departments that have their own subordinate.
So you have to kind of get back to see what Weber County's was.
Yeah.
Kevin, you have a comment?
I understand that this is your meeting,
That's okay.
and I appreciate even just the littlest chance to give us feedback. I would propose a change to that first sentence that says Roy City government exists to enhance the quality of life. What about if we tie it to another legal document, the Declaration of Independence? Roy City government exists to enhance the life, liberty, and happiness of all the members of our community. That's my suggestion.
Interesting thought. Okay. Let me capture that. And again, as we refine this, mission statement's critical.
That'd be very
We'll
fun.
certainly look at that and see how that might integrate into the final product. Okay.
I
Okay.
think that providing the highest quality municipal services kind of says all the services that, the police, fire and everything, that kind of. That's all that.
Don't forget public.
Who's city in? Huh?
That's a municipal service, so.
Yeah.
Great comments. Appreciate that. Next chart, if you could. Okay. Now, these are the pillars. You may have seen this typically, a type of a drawing. I've seen a lot of variations of this. It simply definitizes then, in this case, the 6 pillars that we a long time ago created. I'm trying to think of who else in the room was there when we created it, Ross.
Buckets, the first time.
I was 6 years ago when we worked on this.
Okay. Yeah, we were
We
in
use
Salt
these at
Lake.
work, we call it a lean house, and those are the pillars of your lean house.
Buckets when we went to Salt Lake.
When Salt Lake and Bucket did, yeah. Okay, we're gonna break this down and we're gonna separate this out a little bit between the 3 of us and talk about this. But just recognize when we're talking about these pillars, we're really talking about the main components, and this is not all inclusive. At the end of this, you may think of something different. You may want to add, you may choose to take away. We just captured what we think were the 6. If they are the right ones, we move forward. If we need to modify, we're going to try to do that here in the next few minutes. So just recognize these are the pillars or the major components or categories that we want to focus this planning on. Okay, chart. Okay, we're going to begin with community image and pride. And Brody, I think you're leading that conversation.
So this is, one of the 6 proposed pillars. So I guess kind of for this meeting, what we need to think about and decide is, one, is this something we feel like should be one of our main pillars that we focus on? And then secondly, there's a proposed vision statement for this pillar. Are we okay with that? And then 2, as you look at the presentation that the mayor's put together, a lot of the details underneath these pillars are what we're going to come back and talk about. So once we kind of are okay with our bigger structure here, everyone needs to kind of be prepared to put some thoughts and ideas out underneath each of these pillars for the next meeting. So community image and pride is one. And the other one that I'm going to talk about specifically is economic development and sustainability, that kind of thing. But I think when we talk about this, and I can't remember if it was, I think it was Councilmember Joe Paul said at the other meeting that I don't know how we separate like cleaning up our community from economic growth and these type of things. So to me, community image and pride, not only does it affect the economic availability and abilities we have, but so many other things are tied to how an area looks and is cared for and cleaned up after. I mean, Chief Gwynn, I'm sure, could rattle off tons of stats that go with why keeping a community kept well is important. And this also goes into other things that we do as far as our relationships with the Boys and Girls Club is a good example for tonight. The events that we do with the high school and those type of things. So from my time here in Roy, I've always thought that it was something that was really cool about Roy City and So I think it's worth having, but I'd love to hear thoughts on it and what you guys think, and then if not, we'll just jump into the proposed vision statement and see if we're okay with that.
I think that it's a very important part. I do think the category of pillar needs to be there. I think it might be nice to include like cohesiveness. I think image and pride are nice, but it doesn't maybe completely reflect the community feeling that is engendered in Roy, you know, the term Roy boys or Roy, that school pride that seems to emanate throughout the city. So if we could put something in that includes cohesiveness and or change that a little bit, expand that, I think that it would represent what we have that maybe some of the other communities don't have as much.
So you're saying tie it more into like the personality of the fact that we only have a single high school and.
No, I think that's
Yeah,
part of it.
because that's where like Roy Boys comes from, right?
Right.
I am a Roy boy. Matt is a
Right.
Roy boy because we grew up in Roy. Sorry, you've only been here 33 years. I didn't know if that extended to Roy High. In what year did you graduate?
Who,
Ross.
I don't know what year I
Okay,
graduated.
all right. All right, there you go. I was born in 79. That's.
So.
But I mean, that's part of it, but even those
I hear
that
that all the time.
move into Roy feel that
Right.
and they get swept into that community feel. It's that, this cohesiveness, I think is a way, that's the term that I was able to come up with, that seemed to explain a little more of that feeling that's hard to put into words. So image and pride almost seems a little too superficial or not, it doesn't have as much depth or something, but if you could add something with that other feeling, it would be nice, I think, because that's where a lot of this comes into. If you can get people having that depth of feeling and commitment and city patriotism, then I think that's where you get some of the movement and motion and you know, that we're known for and that we're hoping to continue to expand. And that's gonna be difficult because we're getting increased numbers of high density housing and that does not foster that type of feeling. If we've got enough of that strength around us, maybe we can bring those people into it. Maybe they can see what we have to offer that they may have been missing in other places.
Good comments. I like that, making it a little more cohesiveness is a good word, so we can work on that and throw out some options for the
Well, and
next.
it's our image that's gonna bring
Yeah.
new businesses to our town. They're gonna take the exit. They gotta go way far west before they're like, yeah, this doesn't look too bad. 'Cause we did up 1900s so far, but nothing to do about a lot of that, so.
And then I guess, is there any comments or concerns with the proposed vision statement there?
So I was wondering, when you're talking about the cultural services, promote cultural services, is that kind of a focus? And, you know, Mayor, you'll kind of know your intent. Is that kind of like the Arts Council kind of focusing on that? Are there other things that you had in mind for that? Or I was just kind of.
I think, from my perspective, Diane, Roy City brings an incredible lots of things. We got great sports programs. We got obviously great services that we provide. But one area that really, you talk about the character of the organization, really has to do with the cultural piece. It's kind of an elevation, a little bit beyond the basic needs of sustaining an operation, because now you're getting the more personal side. You're pulling talents out. You're exposing, a lot about the human nature, if you will, within the organization. As you well know, having attended that, we already started to see a momentum in our concert in the park. Start off a little small, starting building. We now have 6 more coming, and we're going to build on that. And interesting enough, most, if not all of that, comes from our own. We're giving them a stage to where they can share the talents, their skills, their abilities that we oftentimes don't see. And so I think it's just the next elevation in terms of bringing some of that culture, or better word, maybe the kind of quality of life that we're trying to emulate, and expose that. let people see the kinds of character and talent that we have within our communities. And so anything we do that, trust me with my comment, I was impressed that these junior highs wrote the poetry that they wrote. You know, I kept thinking maybe their parents helped them or something. I said, I don't know what it was like when you were in junior high, but I'm telling you, it was not that. Okay, that was not that. These young adults were incredible. And yet Roy City had an opportunity to expose what I've never seen in my young age ever. And they did a wonderful job. It's lifting, okay, an element, I think, of human behavior that we oftentimes don't get a chance to see.
And as part of that, I really liked the concept of service, but I think that might even be part of the cohesiveness portion of it. And so I didn't have a specific answer of how to put that in there or how to word that. But I believe that how the residents provide service to each other as well as to the city is nice. And if we could come up with a way to maybe just put that feeling in there or add that, it would be very nice, because again, I think it gives the depth that not everyone outside of our city sees, but if we're inside our city, we see that how important that is to give us the strength that we are and can be. So there's a way to add that. I think that would be nice. Service in a different sense.
Okay, so the next pillar would be the economic development and vitality. You can just go. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I can't see anyone saying this shouldn't be our pillar.
This definitely needs to be a pillar.
Ready to do the next one, the division saying. But the only thing I would say to this category, and maybe it's superfluous and not that important, but as I look at it, I think we need to focus and, set goals regarding redevelopment, right? Because that's where we're at. I mean, we all know that we don't have.
We're built out.
Yeah, so, again, maybe it's just a detail that's not super important, but economic development, redevelopment of vitality, something like that, I think would be appropriate. Other than that, again, thoughts or questions about the proposed vision statement?
I personally like this category because it's important for us to understand what economic development actually is. And so we're not doing the shotgun approach to economic development, that we have specific goals that we're trying to achieve. And I think that's highly important when we're focusing on this goal, on this category.
I would suggest we add and increase after enhance. Foster economic development in our city to enhance and increase the amenities available.
And when you're referring to that, what type of amenities are you thinking of increasing? What does that mean to you?
I think when we're looking at a mission statement, if we're trying to be visionary, this suggests we're only enhancing what we have when we could be increasing a variety of amenities, because if our population is going to continue to grow, which it will, then the variety of amenities are probably also going to have to grow. So I don't know what that looks like. I just find this to be more restrictive.
Yeah, you're trying not to pigeonhole, you're trying to make it more broad, so we have people start to think more broadly as opposed to, oh, it's only, who knows what service is gonna come down the pipeline.
Honestly, how often do we hear, I have to go to another city to do this, or I have to go to another city to do that? Well, it's because we don't have that available to our residents. So to enhance what we have doesn't do anything for those people that have to leave to get what they want.
So I don't understand the established partnerships with community neighbors, why we need, I don't know.
So think of it, okay, look at it from this perspective, right? So Riverdale City, I'm gonna bring up a little bit of a hot topic button, but Riverdale City can get a discounted pass to our complex, right? That would be that's the definition of a partnership that we have with them. So we have to think in those types of
But I was
terms.
thinking economic development, that's
Sure.
part of it, I was.
Right, but
thinking, so.
what does Roy City have that other community neighbors could take and leverage. We have 40,000 people in our community. Think of it in terms of like from a Costco buying power perspective. If we can take and leverage and establish partnerships with, again, we're not saying community neighbors. I mean, I don't know what you're thinking in terms of community neighbors, but I'm thinking, what can we collectively as Roy take and leverage to get better deals, opportunities, things like that in partnership with other organizations and entities?
Well, 'cause I know we have, you know, the aquatic center, we have the complex eventually.
Well, and that's part of the reason why we got as big a ramp grant as we did, is because they look at this as a regional
Correct.
facility, even though it's in Roy. Weaver County's willing to put more money into it because they realize, and talking to a couple of the commissioners about it, they realize that it's a regional asset, even though it's owned and managed by Roy. They're willing to put Weaver money
Yeah,
into
well, I
it.
can see us giving, I just can't see us getting. That's just not-
Well, so what's to stop us from, again, this is just a vision statement, but what's to stop us from going out and establishing, again, I use I'm trying to think of the dinosaur park. I'll use the dinosaur park as an example. What's not to stop us from going to the dinosaur park and saying, hey, if somebody from Roy comes, can we get a discount? That's a partnership. That is because again, it's driving economic development. It's again, leveraging what Roy has at their disposal. That's why everybody goes outside of Roy and builds around Roy, is because they feed off of us. So how do we allow our citizens to take and benefit from what we have, which is our population density?
So what I actually was envisioning when when I was reading through that, was not even necessarily going outside of the Roy City community, but
Even internally. yeah.
keeping it internally,
Yeah.
like our neighbors and maybe businesses that come here, or we already have businesses that are good neighbors in the fact that they sponsor teams or they,
Yeah.
donate to the complex
Yeah.
or something like that, because I agree, we do a lot of giving to other communities in regards to the services we provide. But I'm hoping that part of this vision is to increase the commitment that businesses have within our community as neighbors. That's
True.
kind of what I was seeing it as. Like, for example, some developers and some people that have businesses are very committed to being good community neighbors, and some are just very business oriented and they don't have they don't care a thing about the community. So I'm hoping that we can take some of those people and, poke them in the ribs a little, and maybe they can be better community neighbors. Anyway, that's where
Well, I know Larry H. Miller was a good community neighbor at one time, so we'll hopefully
Mhm.
continue that.
And
So
I
that's-
will go with as an example, like all your concrete people that are taking and looking to contribute, concrete. They're not just doing that out of the kindness of their heart, though I hope they are. But I think they're trying to do it with the intent of us doing some type of partnership where we would recognize them down at the pickleball
Yeah, they're
court.
doing it for recognition.
Exactly. Same thing. That's what you have to think of in terms of like community partnerships. That's a classic example.
Thank you.
Good. Fantastic. I appreciate, I think all the ideas are good. We'll try and work in a couple of little changes there.
All right, the next category / pillar is public infrastructure improvements. It's been stated many times before about the $80 million of infrastructure we have beneath us and on the roads. Right now, we're estimating, the last I heard before inflation, was about $120 million in infrastructure. A lot of the time when we're thinking about this infrastructure, we're thinking about roads, water, sewer, or utility enterprise funds, the things that we collect the fees for, but there's much more than that. We have the complex, we have the aquatic center, and it's important to develop plans to pay for these things in the future. The aquatic center at the time of construction was just a fraction of what we would need to put in it 20 years later to replace a pool liner. The big pool down there, the pool liner is about $750,000. The play toy is like $250,000 that sits in the middle of that thing. Now, I didn't even spend that much on my personal house. So things have gone up quite a bit and we as a city needs to be prepared for that. Also, as you know, that we've bought in a couple of fire trucks lately, one at $1.3 million and another one at, you know, the 600 and something thousand dollars that is going to be arriving here shortly. But with that being said, how much money do you need to be putting away year after year to pay for that when we need it or come upon a good deal like we did? So right now in fire, we're putting $185,000 away a year for these types of apparatuses. However, back in the day when they started the complex, we were putting like $35,000 away to pay, or sorry, the aquatic center, we were putting $35,000 away in a fund. However, it was spent on other items. That needs to be replenished for us to move forward with that, so. When we talk about the aging infrastructure of the complex, people know that it was built in the 70s. However, what people don't recognize is that the complex was built nearly 20 years ago, so. Also getting.
Quite some.
The aquatic center. My apologies.
Just so you know, them fancy fire trucks aren't gonna do any good on our 4-inch water line, so they can have a fancy truck as they want out there and they're not gonna be able to put a fire out, so.
Is that public works and fire department like talking?
Wow,
Wow, you just, wow.
It's rain on the parade? Come
Wow.
on.
Probably agree with me.
Well, when you kill over dead, hopefully that fancy ambulance shows up to pick you up.
So the proposed mission statement, vision statement is develop, fund and execute a plan for ongoing replacement of aging infrastructure and plan for enhanced infrastructure improvements.
Develop a fund.
Develop.
I know. I'm
Develop a fund.
saying the cheap. Develop a fund. We need to find a fund.
Suggestions.
So just to make sure I understand, these pillars have been set for a while. They're really our core principles of Roy, correct? And so within our core principles, our vision statement should be, you know, it should tie to it. And then from there, we should build our goals to support that pillar.
That's the next step.
Okay. I'm
Yeah,
just,
the secret here is the category of the pillar of public infrastructure improvements, is that a good one? Does that talk to what you want to talk? And then
Probably our biggest liability.
it's a big one, yeah, $120 million. When I first came, Ross, it was 80. Year ago, Brandon said 100. Now Matt's saying it's 120. We're going in the wrong direction.
My water line's $150 for every foot. It costs us now to replace one.
But does the vision statement then support the pillar? Is that what we want? Because once you set the vision statement, then all the goals, all the objectives focus, answer the vision. And so you'll get a shot at that in our next meeting, but the key is that the right statement? Does it need to be modified? Do we need to take some stuff out of it? Does that talk to our addressing our need for public infrastructure?
You know, and there's a difference between improvements and maintenance.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Maybe we need to add maintenance in there because that's a pretty grand, exciting concept, but maybe.
So obviously Ross, since you've been here so long, you know where the oldest pipes, everything is replaced, you just slowly just going through the city and tackling them, the worst ones at the time, and you have so much funds a year to do that, or?
We started with our first asbestos lines and got them all out of, now we're on 4-inch lines over in Albert.
By the time we get all the way done, you're probably starting over again, huh? But you won't be around, probably. Have to do that.
I'll be getting picked up in that new fire.
Ambulance.
So,
we'll run you over.
so is there money in the public works fund every year to do the water lines and the roads and all the infrastructure stuff?
Things just keep on growing and
Yeah.
getting more expensive. It was, I think, when I was the finance director, the council decided to raise the utility rates $3 a year to support some of these water lines. The initial discussions in the budget is we're coming pretty close to even doing the proposed projects. We could work much faster, but we're still paying off debt in the water fund from some bonds that we issued back in like 2007. So that's something that we could always talk about, and a strategic plan is reissuing bonds in 2029 when they call them. Or we can raise rates. I know right now, we were just talking to the city council meeting about the storm sewers, and this is a big flood year with 3 employees. How important is it to gain staff? And that goes into the next pillar, but that also comes with a cost. So.
Then ask it, and I never did say this. So, like, I have, a bunch of storm drains in my neighborhood that obviously I can tell when I walk past them, there's weed growing down in them, and
I wish the neighbors that had them on their corners.
because it drives me crazy up the street. It's always full of leaves and it floods. I'm like, how hard is it to go and take those leaves out yourself? I don't care to throw them somewhere. I just wish that,
I do it constantly. There's one right in front of my driveway.
yeah, I mean, I have some in my neighborhood and I clean those ones out. But the ones that go way down in, can you, like, we had a group of kids, from my neighborhood there tonight. Can kids like that come and help do anything? I mean, could that be volunteer projects to go around?
They can clean off.
Or community service.
They
Can
can
we
clean off the
implement
top of the
that?
grade, so we ain't gonna let them get down.
Well, yeah,
in.
well, they
Volunteer.
couldn't lift them out, but to clean the leaves and stuff out, and so they don't flood into the road when we have rain. Wish we could, I don't know, beautification committee together, huh, Glenda, and then start maybe spreading the word. Try to have neighborhood committees that could help organize when the storm's coming and there's leaves and, I don't know how hard it would be to get some kids to go and clean those out, since you don't have that many employees to do it.
And some of that goes back into the community pride,
Right.
to take care of our city and things, to get people to want to take the initiative to do so.
I'm just thinking about the pillar and how it affects our whole community, and if 10 years ago, a little more of this would have been done. So that we have to do this right now, so that in 10 years, we're not doing what we're doing with the aquatic center. And going through this same thing, and in 10 years, somebody's not saying, well, it's because that city council ignored it or whatever. So that's what I hope to see out of the infrastructure, is to be able to move forward right now and get a plan, so we're not blaming in 10 years.
Right, because
When we're got a aquatic center that, or, it's not, it's shut down.
complex.
We're gonna pay the piper again.
Yeah.
like we
Blame
do.
that on me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be my goal, and the whole thing of this is just.
Yeah, and I think we need to have maintain in there too,
Okay.
because that, if the complex would have been maintained throughout the years instead of everything just dying at once.
Well, I think it was maintained. I mean, because there was a lot of,
There was.
maintained in that they did what they could to get it running and keep it up.
Sure.
It was
Here we got
band-aided
10
for
years,
years.
10
It
years.
was
later,
reactive,
Yeah.
nothing proactive.
and
And that's what we have to.
Set us up for success. Right?
Yeah, and I think it's important to know with like the complex. You can't just keep on thinking that proactive, we can just band-aid it together. It takes funds.
Right.
So the full plaster is $300,000 or $450,000. The staff isn't able to go do that. So to say it wasn't maintained, it wasn't like a staffing issue. It needs the money to maintain it. And that's the biggest hurdle usually is just the funds.
Well, I'm just happy we have 4 grocery stores. And people have to eat, so we're always gonna need to get.
But then your sales tax on groceries are going away in 2024.
Not municipal though.
Yeah.
The state level.
State level, so we would still be.
And only if the amendment gets approved by the voters.
Yes,
Right.
because it's, that's the. It's going to.
That's it.
So it won't go into effect until 2025, if it goes into effect, but it won't affect municipal tax. It's my
We're gonna
understanding.
still have to, why am I trying to blank on the term? Isn't it going to the ballot? Isn't it a ballot initiative?
But it won't go to the ballot until 2024, 25. Yeah, it's still a ways out.
So we will add something, we'll work that vision statement a little bit to add maintain, because I think that is important.
And I think that maybe is it the vision statement we want to add it, or actually the category or pillar? Because I think the vision statement itself says develop, fund, and execute a plan for ongoing replacement of aging. So I think
Yeah,
that's
so it's
that.
kind of in there.
And then
Yeah.
plan for enhanced infrastructure. That enhanced, I believe, is the improvement part. So I think
Okay.
that it would be in the category of plan.
Yeah, I like that.
That's a good idea, Diane.
Okay, we will work on that. The next proposed category and pillar is workforce development and operational excellence. So this is basically the human capital or employees that we have. And that really just keeps us going. I can tell you right now, the wage war is not over. There's a lot of cities doing a lot of things trying to take our employees and just increase wages. A lot of it has to do with COLAs. We've talked about that in the past about doing COLAs and not the wage survey. So we're trying to implement that type of stuff into our budget. However, when we did the survey, we weren't necessarily going for the top paid employees. We were going for the mean and averaging things out. So you can't say that the pay is the competitive advantage. So we need to come up with other competitive advantages of why you want to work for Roy. And what would keep people here. So I think it's an important pillar. It's kind of like, you know, the employees here to keep. And I know the fire department, police department, public works, over the last couple of years, the retention's been bad. And it's much more costly to retain or retrain all these employees than just pay the wage or do the things necessary to keep them in the first place. The proposed vision statement is invest in the development of a talented and committed workforce to improve service levels for residents and businesses in our community. Is there any suggestions on that?
Recruitment and retention, invest in recruitment and retention and development. Something along those lines. We need to recruit them, but once we get them, especially when we're talking about a transient workforce, we have to do stuff to keep them. Those battles happen at the fringes.
Well, just like Trappist, when he used to say, weren't they gonna start giving their workers like a bonus if they stayed? Are they still gonna do that? The regular
Workers do that.
I think
yeah.
they still, he was planning on.
For the part-timers, yeah.
Can you add those three words, the recruitment and, what was that? Retention, I like that.
You could even do it in the order of invest in the recruitment, development and retention.
Like that. Okay. Anything else?
Okay, next chart. Public transportation. Now the logic and the reason why this is kind of a set aside, rather than tying it to the infrastructure, because the infrastructure has its whole pieces. This one has an element of politics. You're definitely dealing with entities in Roy that are going to be outside, if you will, outside of Roy's influence. And so you're going to have to shift in terms of how we approach this. So the purposes of this is to look at it in terms of a separate entity, the transportation links, the arteries that run throughout our city. And then how do we enhance that? How do we get that? How do we get the funding to support that? Those are tricky requirements that are not typically may not be found in a budget. Example, the funding for the roundabout that's going on 31 and 6,000. That budget, when we get the funding, part of that came from the county. Amber, is that correct? When we purchased the land through right-of-way acquisition?
Yes, we have a grant for that. We're waiting for when we purchase all the property, then we submit.
So the strategy and the goal, if you will, is where's those opportunities? I used to be on the transportation subcommittee at the county level. And we were delegating funding. They get a percent, certain, I think it's like 2 cents or something. I'm not sure what it is per gallon of gas that's allocated to the county. And we're pulling that money, okay, and distributing it across the entire county, including all the municipalities. And so we go in on grants to get that. The actual $600,000 is going to be used to purchase, in this case, the roundabout. 700,000, I think is the latest number. I believe that's a combination of both state and federal funds. And the Wasatch Regional Council is going to help us to facilitate then acquiring that amount of money to meet that requirement. So my point to this is, this one, in terms of what we have to do, kind of changes a little bit in terms of our strategy. Because a lot of this has to go down the political side. A lot of this has to be applying for grants. A lot of this is a little bit different than maintaining the infrastructure. This one, in fact, has to do with a broader perspective when you're dealing with the streets and the public transportation requirements. So that's the reason why this category is kind of outside the infrastructure. If you think that's a good idea to pursue with that, then we keep it. If you think it should be woven in to the infrastructure component, we can certainly do that. But if you believe this is a separate entity and could be handled as a separate entity, then let's take a look and see if the vision statement drives us to where we want to go in terms of what we need to do to be able to meet the public transportation needs of Roy City.
Well, I think it needs to be a pillar.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody goes to Roy City to get west.
And, but, I mean, I think it's a really good vision statement because it is through the state partnerships with the state agencies and neighboring communities.
Interesting, and with your point, we're working a strategy with Clinton. For us to get the funding we need to be able to do the widening of 3,500, if you can get a couple of municipalities supporting the requirement, the need, then championing all those partnerships with other communities helps us to make that happen. And so that's where we see working close with our neighboring communities, because we can collaborate together and it makes a stronger argument, okay, when we're going after funding to be able to get that project done.
So can we turn 4,000, 4,800 and 6,000 into toll roads? I like it.
That's an interesting question, Joe.
Give residents of Roy a discount?
Interesting question.
All three of those roads?
I know the law in terms of what we can do in terms of giving what has to happen to give a city road back to, or
Which
give it
we
to
need
a
to keep that
UDOT.
on the radar for 4,000.
Well, if we can do a toll road.
Yeah, there's a process you can use to make that happen. It's a legislative process, yes. Are you okay with the vision statement? Is it talk to what you want? Now, Mike, to your point, we're gonna build the goals and the objectives in our next meeting. But if this kind of gives us a steering, and we may tweak this a little bit when we actually really start to bring the goals and the objectives to clarity. But at least at this point, you feel comfortable that this gives us the kinds of things we're looking for. Okay, next chart. Environmental stewardship. Now, this is a new one, but I think the world is changing so much in terms of environment. We'll do that. So we kind of couched a lot of things in this. I will tell you, I have my real reservations about the chemical plume. You took a briefing recently from Hill Air Force Base. You heard about it. There's not a lot we can do about it, but I'm going to tell you, we still got 99 of our residents will not allow, okay, Air Force to go in their homes. And they're in the plume. And we've got to keep bringing that message to them.
I mean, you can't force it upon them, but I'm sure there's those that think government's watching.
There you go.
Yeah.
You're gonna put something in my house that's gonna monitor everything I do for the next 28 days.
No, Joe.
Are
And
these men or women that are going to these houses?
It was
we're
regular.
actually both. We actually have-
We can send you next time if you want.
Last time I was out, we had a fire department, we had an Air Force representative. And they basically teamed up and went and knocked on doors, hung door hangers. When I was out doing it, I've done 2 of them now. We've had people just absolutely refuse, would not want the Air Force to go in.
Now we couldn't push it out as a community effort instead of Air Force. We, as the community here at Roy, want to.
And we tried that, and that, interesting enough, I'll tell you what really got a lot of doors open, because we got a lot of houses in this plume. It was when the fire department went there. When our fire department in uniform knocked on that door, there was a sense of comfort, Joe, to your point, that, hey, we're talking about our own, this is us. And they were able to get those signatures to authorize the Air Force to go check, but we still have 99 homes. And
I'm surprised
with
we
that.
did
And so
that.
they want to go in and put something in there to check. for-
And monitors for like a month.
Just monitor, find out if there's a problem with the plume,
It's like a
the
28
TCE coming up through the floors.
I think that's when you were sick.
Oh.
Yeah.
And then if they determine it's got a problem, they'll invest and
Mitigate
put
it, yeah.
in the mitigation
Yeah.
that they'll monitor and take care of for life.
As long as that's
Yeah,
detected,
plus they pay you.
Yeah, it's like $500 a month or a year.
So-
and then they pay
something
the
in-
electricity to run a
Yeah,
little
so
blower
put it
that
under
sucks
your
the air out.
foundation, and it sucks the air out and then it vents it.
So
above
they're,
your
you're
roof
not
line.
going in their house and put nothing in their house.
It is.
Actually,
Yeah.
The sensor goes into typically the lowest part of the home, typically a basement. And will sit there for 28 days, and has a pump on it, and its purpose would be is to suck the air through a carbon filter system. And then they take that carbon filter and they test it to see if the TCE is in
but I
it.
think the mitigation, they drill down alongside of your foundation and go in underneath the foundation and then bend it up.
They could, but they may also use the radon gas approach. And if you're familiar with that approach, very similar to what they're doing. They do put an external pump that vents it out, but some of those actually goes into an unoccupied space or a space within the basement to allow it to them to capture that gas if it's in there and vent it out.
Well, I was just thinking, maybe if you went to their house and they said, no, say, well, how about maybe their house isn't acceptably clean, they don't want you to see it. Maybe if you said, how about we come back in a week, then would you let us see after, then they could.
Do your laundry and clean your dishes and we'll be back. We'll be back in a week.
Come in for
That seems like very, very targeted.
I,
Not to take away from the point, the chief will probably cringe with my comment, but I was on 6,000 knocking on doors a couple of years ago, chief. And that door opened that close, okay, that far. And for a minute with the gentleman I had with me, they were incredibly nervous. As if in fact law enforcement just stepped on their front porch. And we're not law enforcement. We didn't have the badges. We were just there to help them. We got nowhere in a number of those houses. But that's one part of it. Let me just make this clear. We have got some very, very aggressive legislation issues dealing with water conservation coming at us. So when you look at environmental stewardship, it's certainly, we can talk about the plume, but we've got some really interesting things coming at us that deals with water conservation strategies. That has to be part of this discussion. We have got to take another look, Matt, Amber, you guys are close enough to this action. We kind of been on the border a little bit in terms of our recycling strategy. We've had a number of people that will kind of fold out in June, okay? And if you get down to a lower number, then some of the perks and benefits we get to have lower costs, okay, across we can't meet that anymore, which means we got to charge more. So maybe when you think about environmental stewardship, you're really talking also about convincing people that recycling is a good thing.
Well, and maybe a little education in the community. We often use, in one of our counseling sessions, we talk about synergy. Well, that's exactly what that plant up there in Croydon does, where all of our stuff goes to, is not only do they burn off the stuff, but it produces heat, and then they have water or steam generated turbines that produce the power. It actually produces more power than the plant uses.
So
That right there is synergy in taking care of I'm not an environmentalist, but if I know that it's actually going somewhere and doing something good, why not?
Why not?
Doesn't take me that much more effort to put it in a blue can now that my can's all blue and not blue and green.
In fact, to be honest with you, in my case, I wish they'd switch it. I wish they'd take my recycler every week and my, Glenda, you'll like this one. Take my recycler every week and I'll give them my garbage every 2 weeks because I'm generating a lot of recycled material. But
I mean, I've changed my thought because I often generate more in 2 weeks than I can use. So I make sure all the plastic goes in there because cardboard's not as bad for the environment as plastic is. So I might throw my cardboard away, but recycle all my plastic.
But if you think about what we're talking about, we're seeing a whole new element coming at us in I think I referenced in the document that 3 or 4 major automobile industries have indicated they are not going to produce a carbon generated vehicle in the 2030 to 2040, 2035 to 2040 timeline. They're made a commitment. And so think about that from a standpoint in Matt's situation and it's definitely Ross in your situation. And definitely in your situation and somewhat if we have to convert to carbon-free vehicles.
We'll just buy diesel generators to charge those carbon-free vehicles.
So let the diesel pump out in the air. It's an interesting thought. But it does suggest is that we can talk about that, but be honest with you, we have to get ready for that. And I will tell you, Ross, you put a package in, I've read it. I've seen it in the system. And Ross has set a thing in motion by 2028, 2029. He's put something in place to start talking about putting electric charging stations, okay, around the municipality building. And if it comes to fruition, which I believe it will, then as he has to start adapting, and Chief, you may have to start adapting to move to more electric kind of powered vehicles or hydrogen. I mean, there's some interesting technologies out there. Then we have to find those adaptations. All of this talks to the issue about planning the next 5 years of how we're going to handle our environmental. Because it's on us, we are dealing with it. And we need to have plans that you're willing to support and move forward with. Please.
So when you're talking about conservation, you talked about water and maybe, recycling, and I know we've got to work on the details later, but I was just wondering if we were trying to think big, what else you do? And the other question I had was biodiversity. Biodiversity usually kind of refers to, a variety of life entities like, microorganisms and fungi and, some animals and plants. And I was just wondering what you were referring to when you were talking about safeguarding biodiversity, or if we should just talk about children or youth.
That's a good question. This is kind of nebulous in terms of just seeing where we're going. I don't know if we can really put any meat on that part of it yet, because I think it's an evolving process. But certainly, I think it's an element to talk about in terms, does biodiversity play an important role in our future?
I think it does, and I could probably speak to it from being on the sewer board because they alluded to it a little bit when the Hill Air Force guy come, but PFAS. Right now, that's becoming a big problem at the sewer plant and wondering how we're gonna treat it. And the state's gonna start regulating the amount of PFAS that comes through and what the end product is. And so biodiversity actually, when it comes to bio waste, there's a big portion of that in the future that even as the sewer district, we don't know what we're going to do.
Great comment. Okay, so do you feel comfortable? I mean, this may be, I'm sorry, Glenda, you had a comment.
Everybody
My
lives downstream.
comment is just, this seems kind of flat. I mean, should we make the statement be more active, like responsibly protect, use, etc., instead of responsible use and protection? Change the
So much
tense.
more active tense, okay, a doing
Tense.
tense in the vision statement.
And I'm not sure how vision statements are supposed to be written, but it just seems to me that if it's written actively, it's more likely to get done.
Well, because you're saying safeguarding, so if you use that same tense throughout it, it would make sense.
Okay.
And that would need to be done. Whatever tense is chosen needs to be used on all the pillars.
Okay, let's look at that. It's an interesting comment. Okay. Anything else on this mission statement, vision statement? Okay, I'd say next chart, but interesting enough. Okay, now, we've covered 6 pillars. Is there anything else you think we should create a new pillar on? Anything else we missed? Come on, chief, you got some ideas?
Public safety is not one of the current pillars that we have listed. We
Okay,
have
so-
infrastructure, we even talk about recreation. I get that it's one of the lesser included in maybe a vision statement, but public safety as a whole, where we have 2 departments dedicated to the public safety mission, but public safety is not a pillar.
So that's an interesting approach.
I would support public safety being a pillar. I mean, that's one of the fundamental things. We did talk about, the public works part of it, but public safety is one of the fundamental things as the government we have to provide.
Okay, so soliciting strategy is, are you comfortable then trying to word up a pillar that talks about public safety? This will be our 7th pillar.
Can we add to something like the workforce well? The one that
Yeah, no, that's what I was wondering, because my comment would have been to either add it, or is it included as part of workforce development? And, or if we do separate it, does that mean we should separate other departments? But, security and safety was kind of the flashing red light that was missing, I think, for me when I was reading, the first part of it as well as those, but if you do separate out, does it kind of lead itself to separating out other areas too?
I would
the
say,
discussion to say,
sorry for interrupting. I would say if we do add public safety, you take that human capital element out of the public safety and focus on other things that we could do other than the employee retention.
okay,
So there could be other elements, kind of like the public infrastructure is primarily public works and other.
That's a good idea.
yeah.
Not focus on the
I wouldn't want this to be like riddled with things for employees, because I think that's elsewhere.
Yeah, that,
And,
that is-
emergency services, anywhere from emergency manager, to fire marshals, to the police, to the schools.
Yeah, if you go, and there has been a shift from that, from saying public safety to emergency services.
I mean, because look at the guy who came today and wanted to have officers in elementary schools. So
And that could be something that, non-workforce related.
And I think when we talk about workforce development, like public safety is gonna have different challenges than recreation, than infrastructure. So workforce development would be a sub-pillar, I think, of all the other main pillars. Is what I kind of.
But aren't we trying to go for as broad a category as we possibly can? Because again, we're trying to encompass the entirety of what makes Roy City, from an administration perspective, Roy City.
I think from your point, and it's a good way to look at it. If we got to kind of be careful to make sure that if our intent would be as in employee retention or employee issues, if we can catalog those into that function. Certainly, there may be issues associated with public safety that could be defined as outside of that could fit in this new pillar. But if it's trying to understand that, to me, I think if you look at it from how I would look at it, is I would say then, chief, from a police department perspective, we haven't delved into areas that talk about how do we make Roy City more safe. We haven't talked about implementing programs where we have maybe citizen patrol. We've never talked about, when you look at the data, and we're doing really good in terms of our crime rates, but how do we get those to be better? And what kinds of improvements could be made to improve that? And we certainly haven't talked about the judicial side of what the courts might be able to do to help us to be able to find better ways to redirect maybe some children, young adults, to get the right behavior. Those are things we have not explored, okay, in terms of this strategy, but all those are very important. If you look at it from the fire department, Certainly, there might be will be the physical things, meaning is you have to have the tools to do the work. But one thing that we haven't really talked about is that how do we educate? What more can we do to bring safety? I mean, I can't help to think you're probably still finding houses in Roy that don't have fire alarms. We still have those kinds of very basic things. I mean, you think after 20 or 30 years of having them, they'd be out there, but we may not have those. And do we know if we don't have those? So awareness, okay, to public awareness, maybe if you can couch that. So let me ask you this, it's a big ask. Everybody agree to put a pillar that talks about public safety? I think we defined it, public safety, security, and emergency services. We'll couch for a better word, we'll couch a pillar on that. But we need a statement. What do you envision that statement to
I just want to throw this out to be the contrarian. If you look at all the pillars, like public safety is ingrained in all of those, right? Like if we talk about workforce development, that will clearly cover public safety specific goals. We can have them. If you talk about community image, pride, cohesiveness, community safety, that could be part of that pillar as well. You know, even economic development and vitality would go to a safety and a crime rate. You can incorporate any public safety goal within all the pillars we already have. That's just my thought.
I agree. I don't think we should add another pillar. I should just think we should put it in one of the pillars.
Are there terms that we can throw into any of the other proposed vision statements which would punch up and give public safety or emergency services more exposure with that?
Community risk reductions.
Could be.
I'm not gonna be here forever, neither is anyone in this room.
Right.
I don't want to rely on the assumed and intended lesser included as opposed to the explicit addressing of public safety.
Can it be explicitly though addressed as part of the vision statement, or as we do? I think it can still be explicitly addressed. I mean, which I think it needs to be, because we're gonna be talking about the next step now. That could be part of an explicit definition of what we're expecting under each of those. And then it may almost be more impactful because you've got it mentioned in almost every pillar, possibly. I mean, you know, just as a way to be explicit, because I do think having it in there, I mean, that was my first comment actually, is important, but maybe it's more impactful. The one concern I was debating about is we already have 6, and I think we started with 5 with our last one, and now we've got 7, and it almost becomes overwhelming to have 7. You kind of start losing some of the impact of it possibly. So if we could come up with a different way to be explicit, but make it more usable, you know?
So could you combine public infrastructure improvements with public transportation enhancements? Put those under one pillar and put emergency services or public safety as its own pillar?
If the intent is to keep the pillars to 6.
You get more than that and it's almost unmanageable.
Yeah.
But I was thinking public infrastructure improvements and public transportation enhancements. Those two kind of fall under the umbrella of public works. I would combine those two and do a pillar for public safety or however you want to couch the pillar.
Comments, what do you think? Keeps us to 6 that we consolidate.
I'm good with that approach, Alan.
Mark,
I would,
what do you think?
I think it's a good idea.
Okay, Amber,
Too much.
you okay with that idea?
You're the money lady.
I think from an employee standpoint, anytime you separate a single department and put them as a pillar, then I think every department should have its own pillar.
yeah.
So I want to find out the pillar.
Right, no, exactly. I mean, we have one, yeah, because
I
if you
can make an argument for a financial. pillar,
100%, that's kind of where I was going to.
Yeah.
Well, let me just ask this question. What pillar do we currently have that wouldn't have a public safety component?
I think every
all in
department is part of every pillar. None of us should be separated or more important than anybody else.
Okay,
There is one.
Brittany,
Build their own.
You're making the decision here.
Oh. I mean, I think it's an element that can definitely be added to every pillar. I do see the other side of the argument where you look at your employee standpoint, your resident, your community, you've got several different elements to have basis to create a pillar.
Well, then let's offer this. Let us come back. We'll try to integrate the public safety emergency service component within those. If it doesn't seem like we can make it fit well, then we'll at least have the option, we'll throw an option on in front of you on the next meeting that says there's opportunity for a standalone. Then we'll also propose.
Even if we don't get a standalone, I still propose combining those two because I think they fall under basically one umbrella.
I guess my only pushback is we have a track station with a lot of money that's gonna be coming into, and if you go back to like the 20-year-old general plan that we had prior, it didn't even mention that, where suppose we actually have had it now for a number of years. So I'm thinking it would be short-sighted if we didn't separate out the new, is my perspective.
Well, think about that. We'll kind of flush that out. It may very well be that at the end of the day, your ideas might very well be keep it to 6 because it becomes unmanageable. And if it's over 6, because we're going that, then consolidation of that, those would be probably the best, most likely ones to consolidate. But we'll take a shot at it from the next standpoint to see if that will work. Bring that back to you in our next meeting. Let's hash that out, and then we just need to put the objectives, goals, and you need to make assignment of who's going to basically be able to write the requirements from it. So that'll be our next meeting. In fact, you'll see that on our next chart. Okay, anything else before we move to the last piece? Okay, chart. Okay, this is what we're thinking we'd like to do in our next session. We'll go ahead and staff will update the plan with information from this. You gave us some good feedback. Let's go ahead and we'll give you some options. Request each of you review the goals and objectives to each of the categories. So what we're going to do is get that consolidated and we're going to send that back to you. What we'd like you to do then is when you look at the pillar vision statement and we give you some goals and objectives, that you look through those and says, are they the right goals and objectives for that particular pillar? Do we need to add some, change them? Okay. And then collect that, you'll send that back into the city. The city will once again consolidate that input. We'll flush that out here. And then at the end of that meeting, our game plan would be is you need to assign ownership. Who's responsible then for that objective? Who's going to talk about how we're going to do that? And then we make those
ownership, but what's the return and report?
That's the last piece. Yeah. The vision will be is if we can get to this point, then what we're going to do is how do we update it? And then how do we return and report to it? Because let's be honest, we see progress when things are measured and reported. So if you have a mechanism, and what I was going to propose to you is I would suggest to you what we do is that at least every quarter in one city council meeting, we just show progress. So you get to see it once a quarter. It may very well be, it'll be economical development. It may very well be, it'll be one of the other pillars, the other 2 pillars, but you will see by the end of the year how we're progressing in terms of that. And the critical component to this is what's about to happen. Matt and his team have got to start going into the budget cycle. When the budget cycle goes in, what we wanted to do is frame the things that are important. And you've got to then say, get them into this year's budget. Not everything, but things you think need to be done. And then you'll talk about it, you'll discuss it, you'll vote on it. And once you approve that budget, then that gives Matt and team the responsibility to execute everything you put in that budget. And that's how we'll make it work. We'll keep this thing feeding. We'll do it primarily, try to use the budget cycle as an opportunity to get the things done you need to done over the next 5 years. And we'll update as often as we need. Okay? Any questions before we call for adjournment?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
All said, let's have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
I will second that.
Okay, I got a Joe and a Randy. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.